What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another Bros Talking Soccer podcast. My name is Dave Knittel, and on today's podcast, I am joined by Daniel Workman. Daniel is involved in American soccer in a lot of different ways, so I'm excited to talk to him today. Daniel, hello, how you doing?
How are you doing? I'm doing well.
All right, happy to hear that. If you're joining us live on YouTube, say hello, interact with us. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, let us know in the chat feature as we go along here. Even if you're watching in the future and not joining us live, hey, still feel free to leave a comment. I'd be happy to relay that along to Daniel, and we'll get, comments, questions, whatever answered. And with that, I think we're ready to jump into the podcast. Any last questions or anything for me, Daniel?
I'm good.
All right, let's get
Fire
to
away.
it. I'd like to welcome on Daniel Workman, who has been involved in American soccer in many different ways. Currently, he has the Daniel Workman Show, a daily live show and video stream, also available on as a podcast on his website. Daniel, welcome to Bros Talking Soccer. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you for joining us. Before we get into talking about your current show, I'd love to talk a little bit about how you got into the sport of soccer. So where are you from and how'd you get involved in the sport?
So I am from the land of American football craze in South Alabama. So I'm a few hours south of Tuscaloosa, which is for all intents and purposes the epicenter of college football every Saturday in the fall. I grew up in a suburb of Mobile, Alabama. It's the actual city town is about 25,000. It's kind of a collection of towns side by side, but this one town is about 25,000, called Daphne, like the character from Scooby-Doo. And right now we've got, I think, 5 or 6 kids from this one city in the NFL, from a town of 25,000, one high school. So to tell you, like, we shouldn't have one, much less 5 or 6, it tells you how crazy people are for American football. Soccer is growing, but it's nowhere near that level. So basically, growing up here, soccer wasn't available in an organized way for most kids. And it's certainly not where I grew up playing sports. And so my introduction to the game came because a friend of mine, when we were 4 years old, he and his family, he was the middle of 3 boys. He and his brothers and his parents moved to Brazil as missionaries. And they came back, I think it was about 18 months, maybe 2 years later. We were about 6 when they came back. And I came over to their house. They were visiting for a few months before they went back to Brazil. And I went over to their house and asked them if they wanted to play, baseball, basketball, American football, basically. Of course, just called it football. And because that's really anything, that was played around where I grew up. And they were like, nah, we're not interested in that. We play, real football, or what you Americans call soccer. Now they're Americans, but they had been in Brazil, a couple of years, and so it was definitely they had definitely kind of taken that on, and so they introduced me to the game. I never had the opportunity as a kid to play organized soccer. It was always just kind of recreational pickup and goof around with the ball, things like that. Due to some things of the way our high school scheduling was, I couldn't play in high school either. They had introduced some kind of like block system, and so it kind of really limited what you could do. So anyway, never played organized, but because of that experience, I told my wife when we were, dating and engaged in college, talking about, hey, what comes next when we get married and have kids, etc. What I would like to see for our kids is that they get an opportunity to play soccer and baseball when they're kids, and then let them go from there. Maybe they hate sports and they don't want to do anything. Maybe they like baseball and they hate soccer, or maybe they like soccer. And in my case, both of my kids pick soccer after, kind of getting a chance to do both and all of that. So, so that it worked out. And so even though I didn't get it, I wanted to make sure my kids got the opportunity to do it. And so, it all began though from that, family, moving away. And matter of fact, a couple days ago, he and I were chatting and, back and forth about the game and stuff. I mean, we're still in contact. And he told me recently, he said, I kind of feel like I get like partial credit for all of your work, since, we were kind of the ones who introduced you to the game. And I told him, I said, well, I tell that story all the time when people ask, where did I, get introed to the game? I tell the story about you guys. So, I was like, you definitely have the right to walk around and go, hey, I know that guy, and I'm the guy that introduced him to this game that he's so passionate about. So, everybody's got a unique story. I find that talking to people all the time on the show, and mine's obviously different than most in a lot of ways. But it's shaped me kind of into who I am, and in terms of being in the game. And I think a lot of times people mistake not having a formal education, growing up playing in organized recreational soccer, etc., but for not understanding or whatever. But really and truly, especially in the world we live in today, you can get access to information and things, if you educate yourself. So I've just kind of chosen to take that path, and for whatever the case, I'm pretty good at processing information and figuring out how to break it down and disseminate it. And so I've, just been able to do that as well in terms of learning the game, whether that was coaching, whether that's been, on the structure and system of American soccer, et cetera. So.
Very cool. So that's awesome to hear kind of how you got into the sport. And, the next thing I wanted to talk about is that in 2017, I believe, or was it 2018? Eric Winalda ran for U.S. soccer president. What year was it? It was last year, right?
So it started is the fall of 2017. The election was February of 2018.
Got it. And you helped run that campaign. I believe you were his campaign manager, correct?
Yeah. So it didn't start that way. Eric and I never met. We had mutual friends, and when I saw that he was going to run, I just did what I normally do in the way that I network with people all over the world, and that is I slid into DMs on Twitter and included one of our mutual contacts and said, hey, it looks like you might run. If you decide to run, let me know. I'll make some stuff for you. Because I have a production company, I have a creative agency, and that's kind of what has been able to power, all of projects like Daniel Workman Show and other stuff. So, basically he was like, oh, that sounds good. I'll be in touch, because when I sent him that, I also sent like a mock-up of some stuff. And, anyway, so we connected a couple of days later. He gave me a call. I started just helping out with some media graphic stuff behind the scenes and video and some other stuff, and had made some content that had kind of circled the offices of Fox Soccer Studios. He didn't even know that I had made it. He had been showing it. He actually called me. It's funny. He called me. He said, hey, have you seen this video out of blah, 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 blah? And I was like, yeah, I made that. And he was like, what? And then he turns to everybody in the background. It's like, hey, this is the guy that's helping me. He made that, So it was really funny. And so we met up in person in Jacksonville, Florida, early in November of 2017. I met up with he and Amanda, his wife, for the weekend at a GOT soccer convention. And, we did some, recording stuff, some videos, some content over the course of that weekend. Took an impromptu trip that Sunday night up to Atlanta. And all day Monday we had meetings. He and I went to meetings. Amanda had flown back home and finished out there, and then I came home that next day, that Tuesday. And then a few weeks later, I actually flew out to LA and met up with him there at his house, stayed with him there, kind of planning out some stuff. And then he and I flew to North Carolina for an event. And after we got back from that event, it was, I don't know, maybe a couple of days later, they called and said, he and Amanda, I talked to both of them. They were like, hey, would you just run this thing? Like, you and Eric work well together and blah, blah, blah. And I said, sure. So we went basically from, December through February. In January, the month of January, I think I was home 8 days. In January of 2018, we were just on the road, or I was basically living at their house, when we weren't in a meeting. So, it was fun times. It was great times. Obviously we didn't get the result we wanted, but it was definitely a great experience, and got to meet a lot of people, and, and I think we made an impact on some things, certainly not to the level we wanted, but, it left me, at one part kind of, I wouldn't say depressed, but definitely like, hey, this is going to be even harder than I thought. On the other hand, I was encouraged because I did meet a lot of good people that want to see progress and change, and just aren't empowered at this point to be able to do enough on their own. So that kind of, led me to look at some other ways to kind of help them and all of American soccer kind of take the next steps towards reform and progress.
Yeah, and so I definitely want to dig into that, and I think we'll get to it with a couple questions later. But with the campaign, what is actually involved in running someone's campaign? Are you planning out like where he's going, who he's speaking to? Are you planning out what he's saying? Like, are you giving him speeches? What's actually involved in running a U.S. soccer presidential campaign?
Well, I'll say this. There really was never a U.S. soccer presidential campaign before the 2018 election. Sunil Gulati had run unopposed several times. He probably would have run unopposed again, had some different events not happened, and then Carlos Cordero deciding to get in, I think was all part of a realization that Sunil was going to have some issues getting reelected. And so anyway, in terms of the actual mechanics of the election, we did all kinds of stuff in terms of scheduling. We had a team. This was not like just Eric and I. We had a team of people from different parts of the country, different backgrounds. We had a guy that helped create the UEFA Champions League. That was one of our senior advisors in helping us with the campaign. We had another guy that's an entrepreneur and business owner who's very successful, who is really good at operations and kind of being able to, help us with messaging and things like that. And so he was another senior advisor. With another guy that's incredible with 501c3 funding. He kind of works in that financial space. So we had, like, behind the scenes, like a really good brain trust. And so we were just kind of, able to, get on conference calls and talk about macro stuff, but then also like talk about micro execution in terms of scheduling and different things, in terms of like, okay, speeches and what are we going to talk about with this? What's our goal? What's our target with this message or this interview or whatever? So, it was definitely a team effort. It was not, I do not at all want to say, this was Eric and then me and Amanda, and then that was it. Like, there was a lot of people behind the scenes, and most of those people, to Eric's credit, were already in place when I came along. It just, for whatever reason, worked out for me to be able to have the flexibility because of having my own companies and stuff. I could kind of be able to get out and do what I needed to do from a scheduling perspective. I didn't have to worry about certain office hours or whatever. I have a team of people that work in my own companies that I could kind of manage from a distance. And so I think that was part of it. Just Eric and I clicking were part of it. And ultimately, the team he amassed, I was just a part of that and kind of leading that. But I mean, they were all incredibly talented and bring a lot to the table. And I think American soccer, to me, looking at all of it, I think, to me, that's one of the biggest disappointments of that election, was the fact that those people could have been essential in both the day-to-day as well as a board level type role, and would have been extremely good for American soccer if they were involved. So I mean, am I proud of our work? Absolutely. But I think the spotlight, should really be on Eric and the rest of the team in terms of what they brought to the table. Would have been really impactful for all of U.S. soccer.
Got it. And it's a fascinating experience. Unfortunately, it doesn't go, the way that you guys wanted. Flashing forward a couple months, then you were involved in some way with the letter that sort of circulated on Twitter and social media, in the promotion and relegation letter sent to Carlos Cordero and Gianni Infantino. I believe there was a meeting in Miami or Florida, and a letter was sent to try to encourage them to implement promotion and relegation in U.S. soccer. Can you talk about your role in that letter, and then what you're hoping to accomplish with it?
Yeah. So look, the meetings were the FIFA Council meetings in Miami. I actually went down and covered it in person. And that project is Chris Kessel, myself, and there's others who have helped get clubs, reach out to clubs. In terms of that campaign, the goal of the campaign was to basically demonstrate to FIFA, to CONCACAF, to U.S. Soccer, to the Court of Arbitration in Sport, that this conversation about sporting merit, i.e. promotion and relegation, is not limited to one or two troublemakers, which is the way U.S. Soccer would paint a Miami FC or Stockade who put their names on the original complaint to the Court of Arbitration in Sport. So we were basically just, Chris and I were basically just trying to support those efforts, and felt like if we could bring together, 100 clubs around the country to do that could be helpful, really taking inspiration from some of the things that happened in Australia. The list exceeded our expectations. We topped over 300, and in trying to support that case. The case, I think, was heard. I think there was a hearing last week, or maybe in the last 2 weeks. There hasn't been an announcement or result yet of that, but all of our efforts were kind of leading up to that and trying to support that as kind of a next step. And going back to what I said about lessons learned in the campaign, this was one of those things that it's easy to get on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and social media and say, what you think should happen or this or that. But the real work of progress and change and reform is going to require action. And I remember the moments after we lost the election. I said to some people out in the lobby that, I mean, this is like literally minutes after we lost. I said to several of them, look, that there's some things that have to change. One of the things that has to happen is there has to be a change with American soccer media. They're not covering the sport in a way that is going to help lead us towards reform and proper governance, transparency, FIFA compliance, etc. Second, clubs and leagues are going to have to decide for themselves to get together, and the federation isn't going to do that for you. So we kind of talked through some of those things, and this was a way that Chris and I were talking about, like, hey, how can we help that effort? How can we take action, not just complain about things, but how can we take action and get clubs to support one another? And so kind of a first step. There's a lot more to come after that as well, but this was a first step in that. And then, launching, but before I launched the Daniel Workman Show a couple months ago, I had Soccer Works, which was a daily form, 2-minute short form podcast, kind of a micro podcast. And I ran that for a while as kind of a first foray into media, kind of figuring out some things. And so I saw, okay, hey, this has got some traction. It's working. I'm getting some good feedback from people. I was like, okay, it's time to now kind of transition to a full-blown show. And, so both kind of parallels, the media piece as well as taking action with clubs has been paramount to that whole process. So the Miami FIFA meetings and the letter were just kind of a natural extension of Chris and I and others going, how can we support this with real action?
Got it. Okay. And so then you kind of launch your show and the Daniel Workman Show. That's what it's called. Can you tell us about that? It's I believe a daily show every weekday. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, it's weekdays, 9 a.m. Eastern. Right now, we're running a 1-hour show. We have plans to expand the show to at least 2 hours every morning, Monday through Friday. But right now, we kicked off with an hour. Again, I'm a believer in getting it right first, and then and expanding when I feel like, okay, we've reached scale and stability. And so we've been doing that in this 1-hour format, going well, and getting some, in the early stages, we had to get some things sorted with tech and everything that felt like it would be better to stay with that 1 hour. Great thing about the show is that I'm able to, compared to Soccer Works, which was in and out in 2 minutes, there's only much you can say in the 2 minutes. In the hour format, I've been able to bring on a featured guest every day and be able to kind of chat about all kinds of stuff. So, I've talked to I've had Eric on the show. We've talked. That was a great episode. Last week I had Tiffany Weimer, who's a professional soccer player. She's playing in Denmark right now. I had her on the show. Going all over the place. State association people. I've had players. I've had coaches, and other people that work in the game or cover the game. Lawyers. We got all these court cases, so we talk about some of that. So it's really given me the opportunity to kind of bring together all these different stories and voices to really start to cover the game. I feel like in a way that's better for American soccer.
Is the show focused on American soccer and people involved in the game? Is it just generally anyone involved in soccer? Is there a specific area you focus on?
It's covering the game, certainly, and it's we talk about the game all over the world, but there's definitely, being in America, there's definitely American bent to it in terms of some of the focus, some of the, hey, we're not doing things the right way, here's what it looks like, very similar to what I was doing with Soccer Works in the 2-minute form. It just gives me the opportunity and platform to expand on that a little bit. give some color, put some meat on the bones in terms of what does that look like, why does promotion relegation matter, and what is the real impact of some of those things. One of the things I'm excited about with the show is this summer I'll be in Europe for 3 weeks, and so we're working on some plans to do the show live from Europe, from some clubs in Europe. I hope to have some announcements on that very soon about that European tour that will be on in mid-July, early August, and to be able to kind of bring the show on the road to Europe, cover the game, and have some conversations with some people in person over there. I mean, I've already had guests from all over the world on the show. You know, first team scout for Manchester United, Tommy Muller-Nielsen, who is a Danish guy, coach and scout for Manchester United, had him on the show. Being able to kind of connect with some of those people in person while in Europe at these clubs is kind of the aim of that tour, and being able to talk to them, you know, in person from some of those places. So hopefully we'll have that information where we can kind of release that soon. But you know, for me, it's not just about American soccer, but obviously that is a big part of mine, fixing American soccer. And so I'm always for ways to kind of connect the dots, and hopefully turn the lights on for somebody each and every day that maybe didn't realize our potential, what we could be, and what we're doing wrong, and how we could get it right.
Very cool. Who has been the most interesting guest that you've had on the program? You know, whatever direction you want to take that. Who's been someone who either maybe you didn't even think of, or just someone who you found, you know, particularly interesting?
That's a tough one. I've really enjoyed, you know, most of the guests on the show. I mean, they've all come from kind of different backgrounds. I mean, I'll say, like last week, for example, I had 2 different guys who grew up in Africa on the show. Zinzo was on Wednesday, and then I had Terry on Thursday. Terry Igwe, who's the technical director, DOC for Western Pennsylvania Soccer Association. And to kind of hear some of their background growing up, I thought was pretty interesting. Terry, I took a coaching license course from him a few years ago, and he's outstanding. He has a knack for really breaking things down and giving you some really good bite-sized, like I call them like power statements. Like he's just got a way about him, and so that was good. Talking with Tiffany earlier last week was great as well. Like, you know, her background and her journey to play all over the world, to keep playing, you know, professionally, and at the same time take the advice of the that had been given to her about, you know, finding ways to kind of fund her own journey, so that she wasn't, wasn't having to say no to certain opportunities that maybe she wanted to take. So she's, been able to launch a project, a company called Ductic Brand. And, that's been part of her journey. I mean, like I said, I could just basically go down the list of all these and what I've enjoyed from all of them. It's been great. I mean, Mickey Turner's come on actually a couple times to talk about the legal cases, and all of that aspect. So, I mean, it's been a lot of fun being able to talk to people from different backgrounds. You've had a Sheldon Grizzle with Chattanooga Football Club, and then you've got Eric with Las Vegas Lights, and Chris Kessel was first guest on the show, and we were able to kind of talk from day one about the whole letter project in the first place. So when I go back and think through, like, story time with Dave Larraba, who's been in West Virginia Soccer Association for over 30 years. I mean, all of these different opportunities have been really cool, and I hope to keep bringing more people like that on air to be able to share their stories so that the audience can hear even more insight. I think we're we don't do enough even at the MLS level. And I'm not a big fan of MLS. If you watch the show at all, you'll know that. And it's not because I want to hate on MLS. It's just I think that they are part of why we're not realizing our potential. I would love for them to embrace FIFA compliance, and I would love to be able to, see that entire league set on fire in a good way. And challenge leagues around the world. Really, I would love that. But we don't even cover that league, the MLS, the way that it should be covered. I mean, the way you see the media covering stories around the world internationally, we don't even get that coverage of MLS. So to say that we need to highlight these stories, I think is important. Today's guest, Dan Vaughn's a prime example of that with Protagonist, and the work that they're doing with the lower leagues and covering, clubs all over the country. I mean, those stories and those efforts are needed. And so, I enjoy sharing them.
Awesome. So yeah, we have, for anyone who doesn't already know, in the video description, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening to the podcast, we have Daniel's website, his social media, all linked there. So definitely click on it, check out the show. You can find all the shows on his website pretty easily. Let's get to a couple Twitter questions we have, mainly in the pro rel front. So the first question comes to us from Ben Fast. And so he says, do you believe MLS, some, and U.S. soccer and its operatives would ultimately come around to accepting pro rel if him and Ted Westervelt, the other kind of main pro rel guy, or at least is associated with it on Twitter, if they did not exist? So he's basically asking if U.S. soccer and MLS would be more receptive to pro rel if kind of people like him on Twitter didn't exist. So what do you think about that?
Well, I would challenge the premise of the question, and that is that they're the two main guys for pro rel on Twitter. I don't buy that. I kind of look at that as kind of a straw man question. So I don't really accept that premise. I think there's a lot of people on social media, and we obviously have seen in collecting over 300 clubs who have actually signed their name on the dotted line saying we are in favor of this, who are for promotion relegation, and having that conversation with U.S. Soccer, having FIFA kind of step in and say, U.S. Soccer, you got to handle this properly. So I think there's a lot of people. I think that number is way higher on social media than just a couple guys. I don't think that a couple guys are in the way of promotion relegation, and I don't think a couple guys are going to make promotion relegation happen. I think it's going to take a lot of people working together, and sweat equity to get us where we need to go. So I don't think that MLS or U.S. Soccer, for that matter, are going to do anything unless forced to do so. And that force may come legal challenges. And there's, as we all know, there's, a lot of legal challenges facing U.S. Soccer, both directly and indirectly. And then obviously you've got also the Court of Arbitration in Sport, which is not technically a legal case, but it is part of kind of the legal proceedings. And then there's also another way of force, and that is pressure. That pressure comes when clubs decide for themselves, and this is the key important point here. And Dan and I talked about this on the show this morning. Clubs over leagues is the way it is around the world. And in America, it's the opposite. It's leagues over clubs. So clubs over leagues means that if these clubs, a Chattanooga, an AFC Mobile, Detroit City, the Soccer Soldiers in South Florida, if all of these clubs around the country come together and say, we want a system that works for all of us, and then begin to take it upon themselves to organize And that may mean current leagues, that may mean the creation of new leagues, but it's all based around this idea of clubs over leagues, and really realizing that leagues are nothing more in the grand scheme of things, an organization of clubs. It all begins and ends with the clubs, not the other way around. Kind of the chicken and the egg. In this case, we know clearly what should come first. It's the clubs. So if the clubs begin to take action and organize, that creates pressure, and the legal cases create pressure. I think we're already seeing, some of the financial pressures on MLS and U.S. soccer from the standpoint of attendance. The U.S. men's national team games are still not well attended. MLS is not having the kind of growth success they were hoping for this year with attendance. Numbers have trended in the wrong direction for them. I think that's all part of this. It's all connected. And so I think it takes all of us who want it, and there are lots of us on social media who do, to pick up the phone, call your local club. Maybe you're involved with a local club, and start to connect with others and to take true action and organize. I honestly don't think that U.S. Soccer or MLS cares about our tweets. What they do care about is what's behind the tweets. And in the case of that letter with 300 clubs, that's a problem for them. If it's just me sitting on my couch going, "Hey, U.S. Soccer, you should change what you're doing," they're like, "Who is that guy?" Like, they don't really care. So, it's going to take real action that's going to meet the pressure. And not one person or two people are going to stigmatize MLS or US soccer to a point where they're going to avoid it. They're going to act based on feeling that this is necessary for them. And they know. I mean, this is the big thing about MLS. There are many ownership groups in Major League Soccer that want promotion relegation. Not enough to change their rules, but there are ownership groups that want it, that would embrace it, that want to do real soccer. So to paint MLS with a broad brush that none of them want it is not true. It's just, so they're not going to not make the decision because Ben sent a tweet or Ted sent a tweet. That's just not. I mean, no one should think that, I certainly don't think that way. Like, if I send a tweet, oh my God, everything's going to crumble because I sent a tweet. Like, I wish I could tweet out the promotion and relegation now. And 5 minutes later, Carlos sends a tweet back to me going, "Okay, you're right. Here we go." Like, it's just, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to take work, man. And it's everybody wants it to happen, wishes we could wave a magic wand, and it's just not reality. And this, we all know this when we look at it. You don't build a house by standing in front of your property going, "House, come out of the ground," or tweet at the ground, "Produce me a house." No, you get out there and you pour the concrete and you build the walls and you paint the house. It takes actual work. And that's the same thing we got to do with the system. We can't wait on U.S. soccer. We can't tweet at them thinking they're going to change anything. We've got to actually do the work, and doing that could, and I think would, eventually get us where we want to go.
Yeah, well said. And Ben, I think Daniel just answered the second part of your question there too. So moving to the next set of questions, they come from @InvadeThePitch. So these have a little bit more MLS focus. I know you don't focus on the league, but his first question or her first question, and they kind of, I think I know your answer to this, but I'm still going to ask it anyways. So they say, should the MLS have relegation and promotion instead of expansion teams? So what do you think about that?
I am always in favor of sporting merit, period. So I am not a fan of expansion. I'm always in favor of promotion. Yesterday was the world's richest club game that is played every year. And it's the English Championship playoff. Winner makes it the Premier League. Loser stays in the Championship. It's the harsh realities. 90 minutes, unless it goes to extra time and penalties, decides, your fate. And it may not just be your fate for next year. It may be your fate for years to come. It could be a springboard to a decade in the Premier League. You never know. And the thing that frustrates me when I watch that is we're freaking America. Our game, that if we had a playoff game, would be the most watched game in the world if we got our act together. Because I believe we could have the best soccer league and system in the world. Our size, we have the biggest, greatest sports economy on earth. And so I think if we had a game like that, it would be incredible. And I think there'd be even more money on the line down the road, not on day one, but down the road. And that makes the sport better. That money's going into that club too. I mean, that's another piece. Like, you talk about expansion teams. If you're MLS and you're an ownership group wanting to get into MLS, and you pay out $200 million, that didn't go into your team. That didn't make you any better. You literally paid $200 million to make everybody else around you better and pay off their debts. That's where that money goes, to the other owners, not to you. So for a lot of reasons, sporting reasons, soccer reasons, system reasons, sporting merit is always better than expansion.
And the next part of the question was, how do you think that expansion should happen? That promotion relegation should happen? Should they have a playoff the way that England does? Should it just be based on league system? How do you envision kind of those second division teams coming up to the first division in an ideal world?
Well, so here's the thing. And Chris and I did a series a few months ago. You can find the series on my website. The short link for it is wrk.mn/forward. And it's a 10-part series. We have a project, a white paper. We've already kind of sent a kind of initial version around to several clubs and leagues around the country. And we're looking to publish that officially here soon. And it gives a written step-by-step path forward, kind of what we discuss in the series. And the way that Chris and I both believe in kind of talking through this over the course of the last several years is we need to get regional as quick as possible because the country is so big geographically. So we have a set of challenges that are different than England, Spain, even Germany. Germany regionalizes as well, but they, not quite at the level that I think we should regionalize. I think we should regionalize at the second division on down. So, ideally, I would even regionalize the first division, and in our plan, we actually talk about this. So, what makes college sports so good in America? Why are they powerhouses? I mean, some of these colleges are making more money than professional soccer clubs around the world. Alabama football brings in over $100 million a year. I mean, that's far outpacing what MLS franchises are doing. So what is that? Why are they able to turn a profit? What's going on? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that fans can get in their cars on Saturdays or on Friday night, and they can drive to most matches in an SEC conference. Same thing in the Big East, the ACC, the Big 10, Big 12, Pac-10, or Pac-12 now. And so I think one of the things that we need to do in that system is regionalize as quick as possible. get things as local as possible without, sacrificing quality. So there's a balance there. So you wouldn't want all of your first division just in Southern California, even though the geography piece would work really good. You could bounce around LA and, realistically put like 10 amazing clubs in LA, and put another, 3 or 4 in San Diego and some other spots. And you got like a first division all under Southern California. That'd be great for them, but the rest of the country would be in the dark. Right. So you have to balance those things. In terms of what I think should happen is kind of a hybrid Champions League, domestic league approach for our first division. And so Chris and I were talking about this a few weeks ago, just on the phone, and we get excited when we talk to each other because we're like, man, if this just, we just did this, it would be so good. And this is one of the things that we looked at is if your first division was really 4 kind of what I call super conferences. So if you had kind of a South, East, Midwest, West kind of power conference setup, every year you take the top 4 teams, just like a Champions League style, top 4 teams from each of those power conferences that play in kind of a season-long American Super League, Champions League style first division type. But they're also playing in their super conference. So if you're a team in Atlanta, you're playing in the South, super conference kind of thing. And then to get into that, you're regionalizing below that. So you would definitely have playoffs, and those playoffs would be similar. So a lot of the things with that question comes down to semantics. Those are just details. What the clubs kind of decide. Ultimately, what the clubs should be deciding for themselves, in terms of the type of organizational structure they're in. The clubs should be owning the leagues and be deciding that themselves. But we're kind of creating a roadmap to kind of say, hey, here's a way we could do it, and hope that clubs go, hey, we like that, let's do that. And so I definitely think playoffs would be a part of that whole picture.
And with that scenario, how would CONCACAF Champions League kind of factor in there? Because it sounds like there would be an American Champions League. And so are you concerned about fixture congestion at all? Or I don't know.
No, I wouldn't be concerned with it. I mean, our clubs are not playing, tons of matches right now. I mean, we don't even have single table in MLS. So, the season right now in MLS starts in mid-March, early March, for most teams is done in October, unless you're a playoff team, and then you're in November. So there's not a lot of fixture congestion. One of the things we would do is play fall to spring, and handle things, and this is the beauty of regionalization. If you're in Minnesota, kick off in July, take a long winter break, and then come back with a short summer break, finish up your season into spring. If you're in the summer and it's 95 with 400% humidity in New Orleans, you don't want to be playing in July. You want to kick off late August, September, and that would allow us to accommodate that around the country. So the whole kind of Champions League for just American teams concept would be able to, looking at what we kind of laid out, would dovetail nicely with their regular domestic conference play, that league play as well as factoring in the Champions League and the Open Cup. So the idea would be, the way it should get structured would be similar to, if you're a Man City and you're making a deep run in all of these cups, and you might have, 70 fixtures at the end of the season, like you might be somewhere in that neighborhood. But most teams wouldn't be anywhere near that. Most teams are probably in the 50s. because most teams in America are not going to be, doing that. But if you're at the top, you're getting access to more and more revenue as well.
And you said all of that is kind of detailed out at wrk.mn/Ford.
So, well, we have kind of a presentation where we talk about kind of the big macro bullet points, and then we're finishing up kind of the newest version of a white paper that I've been working on for, I think I sent the first round of drafts out about 2.5 years ago. And I've been, going back and forth with, club owners, people with leagues all over the country, and kind of getting feedback and saying, what are you doing? What are your challenges? And here's where I think we could go. And feedback's been really good. And we've just kind of been tweaking some aspects of the plan so that it's executable. It goes beyond, a white paper and could actually become a, action plan for clubs and leagues around the country.
I love it. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in reading more about it and seeing all that. So, and I'm sure listeners would be as well. So excited to check that out. Last question from Invade the Pitch. It's a little bit more MLS focused. So if, I'll ask it, but what's the biggest obstacle to Bruce Arena at New England? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Bruce is not going to like my answer. One of the biggest problems to Bruce Arena at New England is Bruce. The second obstacle is the system in which Bruce exists. I know Bruce has been on record saying that he does all the same drills that everybody else does around the world. Last I checked, no one was coming to study Bruce Arena. They're studying Pep. So that aside, I'm kidding, kind of. But seriously, in terms of Bruce or any other coach, you look at Bob, in Bradley out in LA, and any other coach in the league, you could put Jose Mourinho or Pep Guardiola in this league, and they're going to run into the same frustrations Tata Martino ran into in Atlanta. And that is that the league itself is not set up to produce excellence. So, you've got a player making $50,000 training and playing with a player who's a starter who's training and playing with a player that's getting paid millions. It doesn't work, and it doesn't work in terms of excellence. So centralized control has allowed MLS to, a lot of people have said, well, they needed that to get stable. Maybe not. But to use that argument now is laughable. That argument is if you really look at what's going on, it's about limiting players in terms of compensation, limiting opportunities. Therefore, they're not competing for players. That gives players, less power, less ability to negotiate. The reason why you don't have soccer agents on every street corner in America trying to find the next talent is the American soccer system isn't going to pay you. So if I'm an agent and I see a kid that's incredible and he's 17, Atlanta United goes, yeah, we'll sign him $50,000. And you're like, whoa, I could take him to, well, then take him. Right, we'll find somebody else that will pay $50,000. So because of our system, I was kidding about Bruce, but seriously, the limitation Bruce has and every other coach has is the system that MLS operates under. And that limitation of player wages, limitation on coaching opportunities, limitation on the clubs themselves being able to, do things to be authentic to their community because of the centralized control and rules. Like, hey, we want to get player X. Well, you can't have him because Don Garber in the central office said you can't have that player. The fact that we even have a draft is just absurd for a league. If you're a player from Atlanta and Atlanta wants to sign you, then they should just be able to sign you and pay you whatever they think you're worth and whatever you can get from them. So that's the limitation. It's the system to give a serious answer to that question. And until that system changes, we're going to continue to run into those issues.
I think that's well said. Is there anything before I ask my final question I ask all my guests that we didn't cover or that you wanted to mention before I ask my final question?
I guess the biggest thing that I would say in to kind of sum up where I'm at on certain, aspects of American soccer is that it's time for action. It's time for those of us who want to see change to get involved. Do a show. If you want to do a show, do a show. And if you want to build a club, build it as big as good as you can. Study what other people are doing and try to learn from them, and realize that there's so many aspects to that. It's not just putting 11 guys on the field. It's getting into your community. It's sales. It's commercial deals, etc. And then it's action that's going to get us where we want to go. So I can tweet with the best of us and go back and forth, but honestly, it's about like getting on the phone and getting in the email and networking and connecting and saying, hey, what can you bring to the table? Here's what I can do. How can we work together? How can we, if I'm running a club, how can I get with another club and figure out next steps? It's action to me is what has to come next. And everything else to me is just a waste of time. That's the lesson I've learned over the last several years is that, and I got to see this up close in the election as well. Those who are in charge they just don't really care about the public in the way that we think they should care, or that maybe those of us want to think that we're that important. They just don't. They're doing their thing. And, when you come to that realization that they're just not really concerned with what we think, then to me, it frees us up to do two things. One is really do self-examination on our own priorities and tactics. And second is to go, well, if I really want them to care, what can I do? And that's the word do for me. So it's just taking action, find ways to help. If you're in your community and you love soccer, like go help your club that's close to you, like get involved and say, hey, what can I do to help? I'm good at social media. I'll do your social media for you. Or, I'm a photographer. I'll come out and take pictures at your practices and your games or your tournaments or your whatever. Like there's a lot of things we can do and take action that can help the whole aspect of American soccer improve. So to me, it's just is what I would sum up everything with is act.
Absolutely. Everybody get out there, go do something about it. Don't just sit here listening to the podcast. That's really good advice.
Or listen while you're acting.
Hey, there you go. Absolutely. You go. Yeah. Still listen to the podcast. Don't not listen. Yeah. And make sure to listen to Daniel's show.
While you're driving to that match or driving to help, listen to the show. There
exactly.
You go.
Absolutely. Final question I asked all my guests. What's the thing you're most excited about happening in your soccer world? You can take it any direction you want. You can take it from a fan, from a work perspective. What's the thing you're most excited about happening in your soccer world?
I think the thing that I'm most excited about is that there are a lot more people than I realized who really want to see American soccer reach its potential. And what excites me is that with a vision and a plan, I think we can actually make some real progress towards seeing everyone's hopes and dreams get realized. Which kind of is what I was saying a second ago, which is why I try not to get too distracted on just, a lot of social media aspects of just kind of rants or this, that, and the other. It's like, I understand certain questions and I understand certain ideas and whatever, but ultimately in the end, like if we want to get where we want to go, we gotta work at that, and like sweat equity work. And that means maybe shutting down Twitter and, typing a letter. It might mean making a phone call. It might mean, listening to this show while I'm driving somewhere so that I can learn what they're talking about. And then when I get there, I'm able to disseminate some information that I didn't have before. So it's getting educated, but what excites me is that I think that more and more people are realizing there's an opportunity here and we should do something about it. And the beauty is anytime you explain to the casual sports fan sporting merit and what could happen, I have always 100% of the time been greeted with this response: that's amazing. Why don't we do it? And so I think if we just keep telling that story, educating people, taking action, because when we act, more things are going to open. I think we can get there. It'll take time, but I think we can get there. So that's what excites me.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm excited about everything you're talking about. And so thank you so much for joining me today. In case people are just listening again, everything, Daniel's links are in the video description and podcast show notes. But in case people are just listening, Daniel, where can people find you online?
Easiest way to find me, danielworkman.com, at Daniel Workman on Twitter and Instagram, facebook.com/WRKMN. Send me an email, daniel@wrk.mn as well. Any of those is fine. And, hit me up. I'll chat anytime with anyone. Networking through social media has been critical to opening doors and being able to try to help the game grow. So I'm always up for it. Hit me up.
All right, people, reach out to him. Daniel, thank you so much for talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on the show.
All right, listeners, thank you for being here. Viewers, thank you for being here. This podcast will be out on Wednesday, May 29th, and Christian, Matt, and I will be back with another show probably Thursday or Friday talking about UEFA Champions League. So look for that, and we'll talk to you soon. See you, everybody.